guys, this is your Sir Kevin O, and for today we will be discussing the revenue cycle. This is under Accounting Information Systems. So, diretso na tayo. So what is the revenue cycle all about? Well, as the title would suggest, any activity that involves the revenue generation would be covered by revenue cycle. It involves the process from taking your customers' orders up to collection and depositing those collections. Well, actually the activities can be summarized in this illustration. Number 1, sales order. Second would be customer service or credit. This is where you grant credit sales. Number 3, shipping. Also inventory management, warehousing. And then 4 and 5 would be billing and accounts receivable management. And lastly, you have your cash receipts and collection. Well, I'm not saying that all entities will follow this flow, Kasi depending on entity to entity, the process might be different because all accounting information systems are tailored to the nature of the business of the company and their operating needs. However, sound internal control would dictate that the activities must be done in the following order for us to secure na there is proper authorization, there is proper segregation of duties, that we are doing independent verifications, accounting records are in place, and when needed, there can be supervision. Well, actually, the revenue cycle can be divided into 2 phases lang. That is your physical phase and financial phase, whereby the physical phase deals on the handling of the inventory and the financial phase deals on the handling of the cash collections. So with that, let's start with the first one, your physical phase. And the subsystem that is tailor-fit to the physical phase is your sales order processing. So it starts, unang-una, of course, there must be a customer order. We'll have to capture that customer order in a sales order form. Then, credit approval must be secured from the credit department. After it is authorized by the credit department, the information is forwarded to billing, warehouse, and shipping. So these 3 departments are now informed that there is an authorized order of the customer that they need to act on. And the process continues like this. First, the merchandise is picked from the warehouse and sent to shipping. Since the warehouse is now aware na merong order, they will have to separate the inventory and then give it to shipping so that shipping can later package it. And then after taking out the inventory, the stock records are adjusted, of course, so that they don't have a problem later pag mag-inventory counting. Next, shipping, you receive the inventory from the warehouse. Tapos, remember earlier, naka-receive ka din ng copy ng sales order from the sales department. You will have to compare this. You will have to reconcile the products received from the warehouse with the sales information received. And then, ship the merchandise afterwards. Bakit kailangan i-verify? Kasi, of course, the sales department would know kung ano talagang in-order ni customer, di ba? And then, there is a different department in charge ng pagbigay ng inventory sa'yo. So, kailangan mo i-verify kung ano ang in-order versus ano ang inventory na ready for delivery. That is what we call independent verification. The information coming from the sales department versus the information that is relayed by the warehouse. Yan. Followed by, shipping information is sent to billing so that they can start with the preparation of the invoice. The goods along with the packing slip and bill of lading prepared by shipping are sent to the customer. So, packing slip, bill of lading prepared by shipping sent to the customer. This is of course through a carrier unless we have our own delivery system. Billing issues an invoice to the customer and updates the sales journal. So, ikaw billing, your job is to make sure na lahat ng shipments na nagawa ni shipping dapat mabill natin sa customer. Of course, how can we make revenue kung hindi natin sisingilin si customer, So, what you have to do right now, billing is, remember earlier, mayroon din copy si billing ng sales order. So, si billing, titingnan niya ang information sa sales order versus titingnan niya ang information from the shipping department. This is again another phase of independent verification. So, billing will check if whether the items delivered are actually the items ordered. Kasi kapag merong discrepancy, this could initiate actually a back order process. So, billing, the information is transferred to accounts receivable and inventory control. Siyempre, kailangan malaman ni accounts receivable so that the subsidiary ledgers can be updated. And inventory control as well so that they would know na ang inventory lumabas na sa warehouse, lumabas na sa company, and they will have to reduce the inventory subsidiary ledgers as well. So, accounts receivable updates the customer accounts receivable ledger, subsidiary ledger. Inventory controls adjust the inventory subsidiary ledger. And after everything, billing, accounts receivable, and inventory submit summary information in the form of journal vouchers to the general ledger department. So, sino? Si billing, si AR, si inventory, sales for billing, accounts receivable, subsidiary ledger, customer receivables, and then inventory, they will have to submit journal vouchers. Ano ang journal vouchers? They're actually summary of transactions. Sometimes they are in a form of journal entry, communicated to the general ledger so that the control accounts may be adjusted. Take note that the person handling control accounts and subsidiary ledger cannot be one person. There is conflict there. There should be segregation of duties. So, in order to encapsulate the process, here is a summary of your sales order process. First, the sales department prepares the sales order after credit approval by the credit department. That is authorization. The warehouse, being informed of the sale, transfers the inventory to shipping. The shipping, after receiving the inventory, verifies the inventory and order information, then ships the order. After shipment, the billing will start preparing an invoice and inform the accounts receivable and inventory control departments. And then lastly, AR and inventory control updates subsidiary ledgers. May kulang pa to. There should be another phase wherein the general ledger updates the control accounts. There. So guys, sales order processing. Here I have an illustration of an example of a document flowchart for sales order processing. I know it looks hefty, it looks confusing at first glance, but I'll try my best to deliver this to you in a manner na maintindihan nyo. So let's start. Unang-una, the departments involved: sales, credit, billing, warehouse, shipping, and inventory control. First, a customer will convey order information to the sales department. The sales department, therefore, asks if this customer can still be approved for credit. Pwede pa ba mangutang si customer? Credit department, with their credit file, will do manual checking on the customer information. So kapag na-prove ni credit department na pwede pa mangutang si customer, of course, send back the sales order to the sales department, and they will later prepare multiple copies of it so that may inform natin si billing, warehouse, and shipping na meron tayong confirmed order. So here, the first copy of the sales order will be given to the warehouse. Another copy of the sales order will be handed to shipping department. And the last copy here of the sales order is going to be our file. Sales department will keep a file informing or reminding them na ito po, ang laman ng file na to are the orders that have already been confirmed by credit department. Yan. The other copies, invoice, ledger, and file copy, itong tatlong to, they will be given to the billing department. Yan. So na-inform na natin si warehouse, si shipping, and si billing. Do take note guys, from entity to entity, magkakaroon po ng difference on the documents na ibibigay and on the process. Well, actually, I can only produce 3 copies of the sales order here. Pwede, 3 copies ng sales order lang kasi yun lang naman ang kailangan mo i-convey na information, di ba? However, between entity to entity, magkakaroon of course ng differences depending on how they design their internal control. So the way our example is presented, mayroong shipping notice, packing slip, and stock release na ginawa, prepare si sales department. shipping notice is given to the shipping department, as well as the packing slip, ibibigay din kay shipping department, and stock release will be given to warehouse. No, it's not given to the shipping department yet. Stock release is for picking the inventories in the warehouse. Here, stock release is also known as your picking ticket, by the way. So, yan. Informed na si billing, informed na si warehouse, informed na si shipping. Next, the magic will continue with the warehouse. Warehouse, ikaw, what you have to do is pick the goods, verify that this is actually the items defined in the sales order, and then, once you have already picked the goods, ibibigay mo yan kay shipping. You may produce another copy of the stock release para maibigay kay shipping yan. Once naibigay kay shipping ang inventory, you will have to file the stock release forms informing the warehouse na itong laman ng file na to ay ang mga inventory na na-forward ko na sa shipping. Also, the stock release will update stock records for later inventory counting. Yan. Shipping. Na-receive mo na ang inventory. Meron kang stock release form containing the items coming from the warehouse. Also, you have a sales order form containing the order information. So what you have to do now is reconcile. Reconcile if the order coincides with the inventory na na-receive. And if you're good, what you have to do first is complete the bill of lading and ship notice. Yan. Bill of lading and shipping notice. The shipping notice is actually given to you by the sales department. Pero what you have to do here is just to verify na this is ready for shipping na kasi nandyan na sa iyong inventory. Yan. Also, the packing slip will be delivered to the carrier with the package of inventory, with the bill of lading. The carrier will now take care of delivering it to our customer. Yan. So, yun. Next would be, after the delivery has been completed, ikaw shipping department, you will relay the information now to this stock release and shipping notice will go to letter A. Ano yan? Punta yan kay billing. Okay? Another thing that you must do is kailangan mag-keep ka ng record or file ng sales order. This now informs the shipping, itong laman ng file na to, they are the inventories or the orders that have already been shipped to the customer. So, let's have a review of the files. The file in the sales department tells them na ito ang mga verified orders. The file in the warehouse tells them na ito yung mga inventory na na-forward ko sa shipping. And lastly, the file in the shipping department, it tells us na ito ang mga inventory na na-deliver na to the carrier or to the customer. Okay? Yan. Billing. When you receive the shipping notice and stock release, another round of independent verification is necessary. So, ang order na na-receive versus ang items na na-deliver. Yan. Order received, items delivered. Compare. Do we have any discrepancies? Because if there is any discrepancy, we need to process a back order. But if walang discrepancy, you can now bill the customer. Billing the customer means creating the invoice. Going down. Yan. The invoice will be given to the customer. After the invoice is created, the sales journal must be updated kasi po ang sales nangyayari when the inventory has been shipped. Thereby updating the sales file. And then sometime later, you will summarize the sales for a specific period. You will create a journal voucher and communicate that to the general ledger department. Also, once you have already invoiced the customer, kailangan malaman ni accounts receivable na may naibenta tayo. So you must record this sale. Okay? And if we are doing perpetual inventory, kailangan din ma-inform ni inventory control. Which is why, itong stock release na to, later, ifo-forward yan into inventory control. But we'll talk about that later. Dito muna. Another copy of the sales order is kept in file of the billing, telling them na ito ang mga sales order na na-bill na natin. Okay? Inventory control. Inventory control will now record stock releases, updating inventory records. Yung subsidiary record niya ng inventory will have to be reduced after that. And then sometime later, gagawa siya ng summary in order to relay it to the general ledger department para ma-update din ang control accounts. Also, stock release documents are filed by the inventory control so that they would know the deductions on inventory. So that's it for the physical phase of our revenue cycle. Now let's go to the second one. Let's go with our financial phase, the cash collection cycle. Our cash collection cycle, of course, cash collection cycle will start now. We will pick up from the end of our sales order processing, which is that was when we have already delivered the items to the customer. And then for some time, the customer will be waiting to pay it until such time that it becomes due. And come the due date, we would now expect that the customer will give us the payment check and remittance advice. And these are received in the mailroom. Okay, so what's a remittance advice? A remittance advice is simply a reminder for the customer that this is the amount of payable that you have. And alternatively, a remittance advice can also be a copy of the invoice that we sent the customer in selling. So the mailroom will receive the checks and remittance advice. However, from company to company, again, there will be differences. Some companies don't even have a mailroom. So directly, these remittance advices and checks are sent sometimes to a clerk in the accounting department. So maybe a messenger, maybe a collection officer, etc. Pero for segregation of duties, it would be better if a receiving area for these checks and remittance advices are separated from the accounting department. So, receiving of the remittance advice and customer's check. Upon receipt, the mailroom clerk will prepare a cash pre-list. What's a cash pre-list? It is a list of all the remittances na natanggap. So, listing the customer's names, listing the amount received, listing the date received, and the check number. Well, this document can also work like a receiving evidence na ito po yung natanggap namin from the customer. Another column could be added as well for the signature of the customer to verify that such is the amount, such is the information, and the check number that they gave us as payment. So that's cash pre-list. The checks together with the cash pre-list is then later sent to the cash receipts department. After that, a copy of the cash pre-list is sent to accounts receivable and the controller. So 3 copies of cash pre-list. One for cash receipts department, one for accounts receivable, and one for the controller. So we already know why we have to give a copy of the cash pre-list to the cash receipts. It is to provide a proof that this is the payment given by the customers. And then together with the checks, the cash receipts department will double check if the checks delivered is actually complete based on the list. So there is again another independent verification that is going to happen here. Also, the accounts receivable will receive their copy. What's the purpose of this? This is to inform the accounts receivable that such customers have already paid their dues so that their subsidiary ledger accounts receivable will be reduced. And then the controller, the head of the accounting department, will have to have a copy of the cash pre-list for the purpose of reconciliation later in the phase of the collection process. So, on to the next one. So, most of the work actually in cash collection process happens in the cash receipts department. And they have the following activities to do. Una, verify the accuracy and completeness of the checks. Well, of course, kailangan i-check mo kung tama ang signature ng customer. I-check mo kung tama ang amount. I-check mo kung para saang invoices to, and all other details. Next is to update the cash receipts journal after verifying the check. I-record mo ang mga cheque na to in your cash receipts journal. Next would be a preparation of a deposit slip because these checks, they have to be remitted to the bank. Well, actually, in some instances wherein the payment is directly through the bank, there is a lot of things here that can be omitted already. Instead of sending checks sometimes the customer will just notify you with a transfer confirmation or a bank reference number, wherein in the cash receipts department, ang gagawin na lang natin is we can just verify the reference number with our bank to confirm na tama ang transfer, na nai-transfer talaga ang funds sa atin. So, kung online transfer, may eliminate na dito yung deposit slip, may eliminate na yung check. Pero of course, we will still have to update our cash receipts journal. And then later on, upon receiving numerous checks and recording all of them into your cash receipts, you will prepare a summary journal voucher and send it to General Ledger so that they can again manage the control accounts. All this now would be followed by accounts receivable department. So, remember earlier, nag-send tayo ng copy ng cash pre-list to the accounts receivable. Also, in addition to that, the remittance advices could also be used as a basis by the accounts receivable department in order to reduce the amount of receivable from a particular customer na nagbayad. And also, likewise, periodically a summary of postings is sent to the General Ledger. This is to update again the control account for receivables. Take note, accounts receivable department, subsidiary ledger ang mini-maintain nila. The General Ledger accountant will have to know of the updates on the subsidiary ledger para ma-post niya din sa General Ledger. And lastly, General Ledger reconciles the journal vouchers from cash receipts with the summaries from accounts receivable and update the General Ledger control account. So at the very end of the process, all of the movements will be monitored by the controller or the chief accountant. So the cash collection cycle, we have here another document flowchart that will aid us in picturing how the actual cycle flows. So bear with me as we go through this one. First, of course, as mentioned earlier, the customer will send us the payments in the form of checks. That is, if hindi siya nag-directly bank transfer ha, cheque ang binigay sa atin, there will also be a copy of the invoice or a remittance advice that will be sent to us. The remittance advice is actually a guide for the customer kung kailan siya dapat magbayad, magkano ang dapat niyang bayaran, etc. Which is why an invoice is actually good enough. So what will the mailroom do with that is to reconcile and prepare a remittance list. The customer will have to verify na in the remittance list, yan ang amount na ibinayad, na ito ang check number, and then sometimes a verification signature will be necessary for the customer. But of course, different entities, different processes on how they do this. Remittance list will be produced in 3 copies, at least according to what our example here does. 1 copy of the remittance list will go to on-page connector letter A. That is going into the billing or AR department. Here we have 1. Another copy of the remittance list will be forwarded to our cash receipts department. Another 1. And lastly, we have here going directly to your controller. There. Yan. So 3 copies. All other departments are now informed na merong customer na nagbayad. First, where the bulk of the work happens is in cash receipts department. So cash receipts department will also receive the checks that are going to be processed for deposit soon. But before we can do that, we must reconcile first if the checks do appear in the remittance list or kung may kulang ba ang remittance list na cheque, etc. The checks will have to be endorsed or signed for deposit. And the deposit slips will be prepared as follows here. Deposit slips prepared. And of course, once a deposit slip is prepared, this will be recorded. In our example, this is a computer operation going into cash receipts journal. So, in-update ang cash receipts journal. And then later, this information will be relayed to General Ledger, whereby the General Ledger will have to update the accounts related as well to this deposit. Okay? A remittance list will go into the file of the cash receipts. Itong natanggap niya from the mailroom. Signifying na ito ang mga remittances na na-process na namin. Cash receipts. Okay, na-process ng cash receipts. And then, the deposit slips. Now, 3 copies. The deposit slip, one of it will have to go into file together with the remittance list as supporting document na na-deposit na nga ito. Another deposit slip will be handed to a deposit manager or assistant. It could be a personnel in the cash receipts department in charge of going to the bank for deposits. Then afterwards, once na ibigay na sa bangko yan, a confirmed copy of the deposit slip with the bank's confirmation will be sent to the controller. So ito yung meron ng reference code, ito yung meron ng date, time, kung kailan na deposit, yung clearing ng checks, etc. Si controller ang hahawak niyan. What are the checks that have been deposited already? Here. On the other hand, the billing department, upon receiving the remittance advice coming from the mailroom, they would now be informed of the following. Okay, itong customer na to na nakapaloob sa remittance advice, nagbayad na po yan. So ikaw billing and AR department, since you are handling the sales and receivables from these customers, you will have to update your record after reconciling the two. I-update natin po ang AR subsidiary ledger. This is to reduce the receivable from the customer since nakapag-collect naman tayo sa kanya. And then of course, the information will be relayed through journal vouchers to our general ledger department as well, so they can adjust the control account. The billing and AR department will keep the remittance advice and remittance list as a file. This is as proof na meron tayong reductions in our receivables. And finally, the controller, upon receiving the remittance list from the mailroom and the deposit slips, he will now verify which among the collections have already been deposited. Ano to? This is now one process in our reconciliation whereby hinahanap mo ngayon ano ang deposit in transit, ano ang total receipts, and ano ang cash that has already been deposited. So, keeping the deposit slip and remittance list, this will be a file of the controller na. Yan. So that's the cash collection cycle. Pero again, take note, this document flowchart could be different from entity to entity. So after learning how the revenue cycle flows, it's now time to get down to what is really important to watch out for in our revenue cycle. Ano-ano ang mga controls na nag-a-apply in our revenue cycle? Una, sa authorization po. Proper authorization of transactions should occur so that only valid transactions get processed. So in our revenue cycle, the following should be noted. Within the revenue cycle, authorization should take place when a sale is made on credit, that is credit department, a cash refund is requested, posting a cash payment received to customer's account. So, si accounts receivable, hindi pwede magbawas ng receivable ng isang customer without the cash pre-list. Next would be on segregation of duties. So here are some basic principles on segregation of duties. Una, transaction authorization should be separate from transaction processing. Next is, custody should be separate from the asset record keeping. And the organization should be so structured that the perpetration of a fraud requires collusion between two or more individuals. Segregation of duties in sales order processing. Credit authorization should be separate from sales order processing. Inventory control should be separate from warehouse. Accounts receivable sub-ledger should be separate from general ledger control accounts. Cash receipts processing, cash receipts separate from accounting records. So cashiers, they should not be made to record cash receipts. Magkaiba dapat yung magre-record ng cash receipts and mag-handle ng cash deposits, cash payments. Accounts receivable sub-ledger separate from general ledger. That's basic. Supervision. So, supervision as a control activity is more of an enhancing function rather than a primary control function. This is to supplement the lack of other controls. Kailangan i-supervise mo na lang. For example, if you don't really trust the person na nagbibilang ng pera or nag-handle ng inventory, they have somebody look at the person all the time while performing his job. So, Ikaw, how do you behave in the classroom kapag nandyan ang teacher mo? Now, reflect on that. Compare, how do you behave in the classroom kapag sinabing wala ang teacher nyo? Relate? Next, yung accounting records natin dapat structured so that it can maintain an audit trail. Audit trail would allow us to make it possible to track transactions through the system and to find where and when the errors were made. So, in order to structure your accounting records properly, the source documents should be pre-numbered, special journals should be used, subsidiary ledgers and general ledgers should be separate, and of course, once transactions are accomplished, dapat departments should be keeping files of the input documents. Can you identify the function of each of these documents? Except for credit memo, I think all of these na-reflect natin in our revenue cycle in this discussion. Next in the controls would be access control. Ano lang to? This is all about restricting access to assets and information. So ang access control po is very important in the revenue cycle when it comes to cash and inventories and records such as accounts receivable, subsidiary ledger, and cash journals. Ito po ang mga assets na kailangan natin i-restrict from access to general employees. Dapat specific people lang ang may access dito. Kung sino lang ang may custody over the assets, cash and inventories, and kung sino lang ang in charge na mag-record, accounts receivable and cash journal, siya lang dapat ang may access sa assets and records na yan. And the last control activity is independent verification. Well, I've been mentioning independent verification quite a few times earlier. So, ang independent verification po, it dictates that physical procedure as well as record keeping should be independently reviewed at various points in the system to check for accuracy and completeness. So, we have encountered that in a few points. Like for example, shipping verifies the goods sent from the warehouse. They verify if it is correct in type and quantity. Warehouse will reconcile stock release documents and packing slip. The picking ticket and packing slip, that's picking ticket actually. The billing will reconcile shipping notice and sales invoice in order to verify if whether tama ba ang na-invoice natin versus kung ano ang na-ship natin. And of course, general ledger will reconcile journal vouchers from billing, inventory, cash receipts, and accounts receivable kung nagko-coincide ba ang movements in the receivable and cash collection. So in here I have a summary of some control activities that may be implemented in the sales processing and cash receipts processing. You can just pause this video if you want to examine all of them. And here, this is actually very important. In each point of the revenue cycle, there are risks that needs to be addressed. Like for example, in our sales order entry, we have 4 examples here. But take note that again, on entity to entity, these risks may be mitigated or completely eliminated or other risks may arise. However, generally, itong 4 na to po, in our sales order entry are the common culprits. Incomplete or inaccurate customer records. How do we prevent that? Well, you will have to do some validation checks, data entry checks, in order to make sure na hindi magkakamali. Like for example, you can use barcodes for products para in entering the item's nature, the system will reject a particular entry if it is not part of your barcode system. Credit sale to customers with poor credit, well, that is the purpose of credit approval by manager and not by sales function. Hindi dapat si sales department ang mag-approve ng credit sale. Rather, it should be a separate department. That is your credit department. Legitimacy of orders can be mitigated or eliminated if there are signatures on paper documents. Papirmahan mo yung customer order so to provide identity to the customer. Stockouts. Well, mamimitigate natin ang stockouts by implementing an inventory control system like setting aside a buffer or safety stock. In shipping, the following are the risks: error, wrong merchandise, wrong quantity, wrong address, and theft. So dito muna tayo sa errors. How do we mitigate the errors? So ano lang ang pwede natin magawa in order to mitigate this? Reconciliation of sales order with picking ticket and packing slip. So itong tatlong to na documents. Before you package the goods, make sure nagko-coincide ang tatlong ito. Theft of inventory. Well, all you can do with that is physical access restriction. Sa warehouse, dapat only a few people can open the warehouse. And siguro makakatulong din dito kung meron kang CCTVs, etc. RFIDs, barcodes, and etc. In billing, failure to bill customer, billing errors, posting errors. Itong tatlong to. Failure to bill customer, well, you should make sure that shipping and billing functions are separate. Prenumbering all shipping documents and periodic reconciliations with invoices. Reconciliation of picking tickets, bill of lading with sales orders. So, this is reconciliations and independent verifications. Billing errors, you can do again data entry control or validation controls. Posting errors, well, batch totals, reconciliation of subsidiary ledger accounts with general ledger accounts. So yan. And lastly, you have cash collection, theft of cash. So in order to prevent theft of cash, one control activity that is key here is segregation of duties. Or dapat merong supervision din. Is segregation of duties and supervision. Minimizing cash handling, prompt endorsement and deposit of all receipts, periodic reconciliation of bank statement, monthly yan usually, and do make sure na ang magre-reconcile is not someone involved in cash receipts processing. So that's that for your revenue cycle in accounting information systems. This is your Sir Kevin O. I'm sorry for the long video, guys. Pero sana magamit nyo ang information na na-share ko dito. Have a good day and thank you. See you in our next video.